It started with a toothbrush. Not mine. Not Ethan's. A pink one with frayed bristles, sitting next to mine in the ceramic holder on the sink. I stared at it for a second longer than necessary that morning, heart strangely still. Leah used pink. But she hadn't been staying here, at least not that I knew of. I told myself it was probably old, one she had left behind from her last visit. Maybe I'd just missed it all this time. I moved on. That's what I told myself to do. Let it go. Don't invite stories that might not be true. But the toothbrush was only the first crack. Over the next few days, the house began whispering secrets in ways I couldn't quite pin down. My sister's perfume, sweet, sharp lilac, lingered in the hallway even after I'd aired the place out. Her favorite mug, the one with the chipped rim and the faint sunflower print, was suddenly back in the cabinet, nestled like it had never left. I hadn't put it there. I hadn't seen it in months. I wanted to ask Ethan, but I hesitated. Not because I was scared of the answer. Not exactly. But because I already knew how he'd look at me. The half-smile, the subtle cock of his head, the patient tone that said, "Nora, you're overthinking again." And maybe I was. Maybe I had been too on edge lately. Work had been demanding, and I hadn't taken a proper weekend off in months. I chalked it up to stress, to my imagination playing tricks on me. Still, I started watching. Ethan wasn't doing anything overtly strange. But there was a softness in his eyes when he looked at his phone. A kind of wistfulness when he lingered in the living room, where Leah used to sprawl on the couch with her novels and leave crumbs in the cushions. I noticed he played the old records again, the ones we used to dance to when we were first dating, but he hadn't touched in years. He claimed it was nostalgia. Maybe it was. But I knew the kind of nostalgia that curled around his expression. It wasn't the kind you felt for a time. It was the kind you felt for a person. One evening, I came home late and heard music drifting from the speakers, Fleetwood Mac, Leah's favorite. Ethan stood in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove, humming along like it was the most natural thing. I asked about it, casually, and he shrugged, saying, "It's just a good song. Haven't heard it in a while." I nodded, smiled, ate the pasta he'd made, pretended it didn't taste like ashes in my mouth. I didn't want to believe what I was beginning to believe. Leah was my sister. My only sister. We'd grown up sharing clothes, secrets, scraped knees, and late-night dreams. She'd been there when I'd met Ethan, had helped me pick the dress for our wedding. She'd cried when she gave her toast. I remember her exact words, "I've never seen Nora look at anyone the way she looks at Ethan." Maybe that was the first sign. Maybe she'd wanted that look for herself all along. Still, I kept searching for logic in the illogical. Maybe she'd come by while I was at work. Maybe Ethan had offered her comfort while she was going through her latest breakup. Leah was always in and out of some complicated mess with the wrong guy. Maybe I was jumping to conclusions because the pieces weren't fitting the way they used to, and I needed someone to blame. But in the quiet moments, when the house creaked and the wine settled in my bloodstream, I knew the truth was circling me. I just hadn't let it land yet. I began to feel like a ghost in my own home. Every room echoed with memories that didn't include me. I'd walk into the living room and imagine them there, her feet curled under her, his hand brushing her arm, the way Ethan used to touch me when we were still in sync. I hated myself for thinking it, for conjuring images I couldn't prove. But the feelings didn't lie. My body knew, even if my mind resisted. There was a hollowness in Ethan's affection lately. He still kissed my forehead before bed, but his lips barely touched skin. He still asked about my day, but his eyes were always elsewhere. I started staying late at work just to avoid the silence between us, the kind that used to feel companionable and now felt like a verdict. And Leah, she stopped answering my texts as quickly. Gave vague replies when I asked how she was doing. She said she was keeping busy, that things were good. But she didn't ask about me. Not anymore. By the end of that week, I stood in the middle of our bedroom, the sunlight angling through the blinds in lazy slats, and realized something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining this. My sister's presence lingered like a stain no detergent could wash away. Ethan's warmth had cooled to something lukewarm and scripted. The calm I'd built my life around wasn't calm anymore. It was pretending. and I was starting to see all the places it had cracked. And I wasn't sure yet, but I had a feeling those cracks were about to split wide open. The sky was that soft gray of late afternoon, the kind that made everything look a little muted and still. I had left work early on a whim, telling myself it was because I needed rest, but deep down, I knew I was chasing something my mind couldn't quite name. The silence in the car ride home buzzed with a quiet tension I didn't want to admit was familiar by now. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Ethan's car already there. Odd. He was supposed to be at a meeting across town until 6. I checked the time, 3:17 p.m. The front door creaked in that familiar way when I pushed it open, but no one called out. The living room was quiet. Still. Too still. I set my purse down carefully, listening. The faint sound of water running, no, it was the shower. Upstairs. I tried to shake the creeping unease as I ascended the steps, the carpet muffling each footfall. I told myself maybe Ethan came home early too. Maybe he was tired. Maybe this was nothing. I'd find him in the shower, maybe with the radio playing, maybe thinking about dinner or his latest podcast obsession. But even as I climbed, I didn't believe it. And then I saw it. Our bedroom door was cracked open, and the sight on the other side hit me like ice water down my spine. Leah. She stood in front of my mirror, in the center of the room where I used to get ready every morning, wearing one of Ethan's shirts. The blue one with the worn collar that I always stole on Sunday mornings. Her damp hair clung to her shoulders, and she was fixing an earring, slowly, like she belonged there. Like she'd done it 100 times before. She didn't see me at first. Or maybe she did and pretended not to. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. My hand instinctively gripped the doorframe like I needed something solid, something real. And then, as if the universe wanted to be perfectly clear, Ethan stepped out of the bathroom behind her. A towel slung low on his hips. Water still clinging to his skin. He froze when he saw me, a flicker of panic breaking across his features before he tried to mask it with shock. Nora. That's all he got out. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just looked at them, at the two people I loved most in this world, standing together in the most intimate space I had. My sister in my husband's shirt. My husband behind her, dripping with the weight of a betrayal they clearly hadn't planned on confessing anytime soon. Leah turned then, slowly. There was a strange look on her face, a mixture of guilt and defiance that made my skin crawl. I didn't ask them why. I didn't demand an explanation. I didn't want their stories. I didn't want their voices painting over what my eyes already knew. I stepped back. My hand slipped from the doorframe. No, I said softly, almost to myself. No. I turned around and walked down the stairs, steady and calm. My heart was pounding, but my feet knew what to do. I reached for my keys, for my purse. My fingers trembled just once. I heard them scrambling behind me, footsteps at the top of the stairs. Nora, please wait, we can. Ethan's voice broke behind me. Leah didn't speak. I opened the door and stepped out into the cool afternoon air. The sky hadn't changed. The trees still swayed lazily. Somewhere down the street, someone was mowing a lawn. Life moved on, as if it hadn't just imploded behind me. I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. My hands were shaking now, but not violently. Just enough to remind me that I was still here, still breathing, still capable of leaving. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't care to see them at the door. I didn't care what they were feeling. This wasn't a movie. There was no screaming match. No thrown objects. No dramatic monologue. Just devastation. Quiet and complete. The kind that hollowed out your ribs and made your lungs ache with every breath. I drove aimlessly for a while, down roads I barely registered. Past gas stations and coffee shops and grocery stores where I'd once shopped for dinners that now meant nothing. My phone buzzed. I turned it off. The numbness didn't hit right away. At first, it was a sharp, focused clarity. I knew exactly what had happened. I knew what I had seen. And I knew that this wasn't something I could unsee or forgive. But beneath that, something darker moved, a grief so wide and cold I knew it would take months, maybe years, to thaw. They didn't just betray me. They dismantled the foundation of my life with surgical precision. And yet, I hadn't screamed. I hadn't begged. I'd walked away. Because somehow, in that moment, I knew that walking away would be the loudest thing I'd ever do. The days that followed moved like sludge, slow, heavy, impossible to wade through without effort. Every breath felt borrowed, every movement mechanical. I stayed with Raina that first night, curled on her couch in a sweatshirt I hadn't worn since college, the sleeves pulled over my fists like armor. She didn't ask many questions. She didn't have to. One look at my face when I arrived on her doorstep, and she knew. Raina had always had that gift, silence when I needed it, fire when I didn't have my own. By morning, I was ready to burn it all down. I want a divorce, I told her, voice hoarse from sleep and heartbreak. Today, I'm not going to sit in this. She handed me coffee and didn't try to talk me out of it. Then we'll find a lawyer. The best one. True to her word, Raina made calls. She had contacts, she always did. By the afternoon, I was sitting in a sleek office with a woman named Vanessa Cole, who spoke with sharp certainty and kindness threaded through steel. She didn't pity me. I didn't need pity. I needed action. When Vanessa asked if I was sure, if I wanted to pause, wait, consider therapy, I shook my head. He slept with my sister. In our bed. There's nothing left to fix. And it was true. My heart wasn't confused. It was shattered, yes, but it was clear. What I hadn't expected was the second betrayal. My parents, Helen and Charles, weren't furious like I thought they'd be. They weren't horrified or ready to take up arms beside me. No. When I told them what had happened, how I'd walked in on Leah in Ethan's shirt, how he was still damp from the shower, they didn't react the way I imagined any decent parent would. There was no outrage. Just discomfort. Fidgeting. Shuffling. Helen sighed first, a long, burdened breath like I'd just complicated her week. I'm not excusing what they did, Nora, but maybe it just happened. Maybe they didn't mean to hurt you. I stared at her, the words landing like ice shards in my chest. Are you serious? Charles jumped in with that placating tone he'd always used when he wanted me to calm down. Let's not make this a war. Families survive worse things. A war? My voice cracked. She's my sister. He was my husband. And you think I'm the one making this a war? Leah didn't even call me. She sent a text days later. I'm sorry. I didn't plan for this to happen. I didn't mean for you to find out that way. That way. As if the betrayal was manageable, just poorly timed. Then came the photos. Leah and Ethan at brunch. Leah and Ethan at the dog park with Scout, the dog we got together. Leah and Ethan smiling beneath golden light, flaunting a fresh new relationship like it was some kind of romantic rebirth. Like I'd never existed. Like my pain was just the prequel to their love story. And worse, the comments. So happy for you too. Always meant to be. Glad you followed your heart, Leah. I deleted every app. Blocked them. Not just Ethan and Leah, but my parents too. I needed distance. Silence. I didn't want their version of compassion, that slippery, twisted thing that only served their comfort. I needed to disappear before they erased me entirely. Fair Lake, Oregon. A tiny dot on the map with water and trees and fog that clung to the mornings like a blanket. I packed only what I needed, clothes, books, my journal, and the few things that hadn't been stained by their betrayal. I left the house, the furniture, the photos. Let Ethan keep it all. It felt haunted now anyway. Raina helped me find the apartment. 1 bedroom, small balcony, view of the lake. It smelled like pine and possibility. There was no one here who knew me as the woman with the broken marriage or the sister with a knife in her back. I was just Nora. Quiet, distant, rebuilding. I got a job at a local bookstore cafe. Nothing fancy, just restocking shelves, making espresso, chatting with the regulars. It gave me structure, something to wake up for, something to do with my hands when my thoughts grew too loud. Nights were the hardest. The silence stretched too long. I'd lie awake, replaying moments over and over. Ethan laughing at Leah's jokes. Leah borrowing my dresses. Me, sitting between them at family dinners so oblivious. So trusting. My ribs ached with the weight of what I'd lost. But slowly, the edges softened. Reina visited. We drank wine on the balcony and made lists of things I'd never tolerate again. She reminded me that leaving wasn't weakness, it was power. I had chosen myself. I had walked away. And in that small town, wrapped in mist and distance, I began to believe it. Maybe I could build something new here. Not from scratch, but from the parts of me they hadn't destroyed. Maybe, just maybe, they hadn't taken everything. The lake was still that morning, like glass stretched wide beneath a pale sky, catching hints of blue and green from the towering pines that framed it. I stood on the tiny balcony of my new apartment, arms wrapped around myself, breathing in the crisp Fair Lake air. There was a hush here that felt different from silence, less empty, more sacred. I was beginning to realize how loud my life had been before. Even in its quiet moments, there had always been an undercurrent of tension, of performance. Here, for the first time in years, I was learning what true calm could feel like. My apartment was small, but I liked the compactness of it. Everything within reach. No echoes of footsteps that didn't belong to me. No lingering sense of someone else's cologne. Just me. My books, my mugs, my linens. I had started over with intention, choosing earthy tones and soft textures. Nothing that reminded me of the house I'd left behind. I kept fresh flowers on the windowsill, a promise to myself that beauty could still belong to me. The bookstore cafe job was peaceful. Not exciting, but warm. It grounded me in something simple and good. Mornings were spent stacking books with covers that whispered of worlds far removed from my own past. I brewed coffee, memorized the regulars' orders, learned the way people softened when you remembered their name and asked about their day like you meant it. There was something therapeutic about that rhythm, the clinking of cups, the rustle of pages, the hum of gentle conversation. Reina was the one who introduced me to Graham Rivers. She came up for a weekend visit, eager to make sure I was truly okay, though she tried to pretend otherwise. "There's someone I want you to meet," she said casually over brunch. "He's not a project, I promise. Just a good human. You could use one of those." I rolled my eyes, but I trusted her. I was still raw in places, but I wasn't completely shut off anymore. I was tired of being awound. I wanted to be something new. Graham owned a small restaurant a few streets over River's Table. I'd walked past it a dozen times, never going in. It had ivy along the windows and warm yellow lights that gave it a soft glow in the evenings. It looked like it belonged in a movie. When I finally stepped inside, it smelled like rosemary and butter and something slow-cooked with care. He was behind the counter, wearing a worn apron, sleeves rolled up, a pencil tucked behind his ear. He looked up when Reina waved, and I saw it then, this quiet steadiness in his expression. Like someone who didn't need to fill silences with noise. Like someone who knew how to hold space. "Nora, this is Graham," she said. "Graham, Nora." We shook hands, his warm and calloused from hours in the kitchen. I expected small talk. Instead, he said, "You live near the lake, don't you? I see you walking early sometimes." I blinked. "Yeah, that's me. I like the stillness." He nodded. "Same." That was it. No overreaching charm, no probing questions. Just a mutual recognition of quiet. I didn't fall for him instantly. I didn't want to fall at all. But he was kind in a way that didn't feel performative. He remembered things I didn't realize I'd said. He asked if I liked fish before cooking it. He didn't press when I kept certain memories to myself. And slowly, like the lake thawing into spring, I let him into my life. We started taking morning walks together, cups of coffee in hand. Sometimes we talked about childhood or food or books. Other times we walked in silence. He never made me feel like I needed to entertain him. He said once, "I like being around you. It's like breathing room." Breathing room. That was what he became to me. There were moments I panicked. When I woke up in the night and expected absence, betrayal, or someone slipping quietly out the door. But Graham didn't leave. He didn't flinch when I told him the full story about Ethan, about Leah, about my family's refusal to stand beside me. He just listened, eyes steady, no judgment. When he asked me to move in with him after a year, I said yes without fear. And when he knelt on one knee in the middle of our tiny kitchen 6 months later, holding out a ring with hands that had built a life beside mine, I didn't hesitate. We married by the lake. Just us, Raina, and a few friends we'd gathered in Fair Lake. It wasn't grand or extravagant, but it felt holy in the way honest things do. I wasn't the same woman I'd been before. I didn't need approval or validation. I had peace, I had choice, and I had Graham. A year later, we had a son, Callan. His eyes were the same deep hazel as mine, and his laugh was the sound of healing. I'd never believed in clean slates before, but somehow life had offered me one. Not by erasing the past, but by building something so whole, the past could no longer dominate it. For the first time in years, I belonged to a life that wasn't unraveling. I belonged to myself. And that was everything. Motherhood softened me in ways I hadn't expected. The kind of soft that wasn't weakness but expansion, like the walls I had carefully rebuilt around myself were now stretching, growing wider to make space for something gentler. For someone who mattered. Callan came into the world just past midnight, his tiny cries echoing through the delivery room like a declaration. When they placed him in my arms, his skin warm and wrinkled and real, I cried. Not because of the pain or exhaustion, but because for the first time in years, I felt completely full. Whole. No longer a woman recovering from betrayal, but a woman who had become a home. Graham held us both with tears in his eyes and whispered, "We made this, Nora. Look at him." Callan had Graham's quiet, observant nature from the start. He rarely fussed just to fuss. He liked to be near us, always reaching out to touch a shoulder or curl his fingers around mine. Some mornings, I'd wake up before either of them and just watch, my husband and son tangled in sleep, the soft light painting them in hues of peace I used to think were only for other people. The house we moved into sat just down the road from the lake, with a small garden out back and big windows that welcomed every hour of the day. It wasn't flashy or large, but it was ours. I filled it with color, not to distract from the past, but to celebrate the present. Soft yellows in the kitchen, deep blues in the bedroom, a warm terracotta in Callan's nursery. Graham let me choose everything. He said he liked seeing me create. "You bring things to life, Nora," he told me once while I was hanging curtains. "Even before Callan, you did." He said things like that often. Not in grand, sweeping declarations, but in small moments that mattered more. He saw me. Not just the surface or the performance, but the parts one used to hide. The parts that Ethan had once ignored. With Graham, I never had to be anything but myself. My bad days, my silence, my tears that came without warning, none of it made him retreat. He stayed. Held my hand through it all. That, I learned, was love. Not fireworks or dizzying highs, but someone who made you feel safe in the quiet. Someone who showed up. We fell into a rhythm. Morning walks with Callan bundled against my chest. Afternoons where I'd write in my journal as he napped, the hum of Graham's cooking drifting from the kitchen. Nights wrapped in low conversation and warm blankets. It wasn't perfect. There were tired arguments, messy dishes, toys scattered like confetti across the floor. But there was no pretense. No duplicity. Just a shared life. Raw, real, and steady. Raina visited often. She adored Callan and became the aunt he'd grow up thinking had been there all along. She never pushed me to reopen old wounds. Never mentioned Ethan or Leah unless I brought them up, which I rarely did. They felt like characters from another life, distant, irrelevant. My scars had faded, though I still traced them now and then, just to remember how far I'd come. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the pines and painted the sky in blush and gold, Graham and I sat on the porch watching Callan wobble across the grass. He was chasing a ladybug, delighted by its flight, arms outstretched in wonder. I leaned my head against Graham's shoulder. "Did you ever think it would be like this?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. I hoped. But no, I don't think I knew something this good could exist. I looked at our son, at the life we'd built, and let the stillness settle around us. Neither did I. Sometimes, when people in town learned I'd been married before, they asked about it delicately. I'd offer a short version. It ended badly. I started over. Most didn't pry. And those who did never got the full story. I didn't need them to. That version of me. The broken wife, the betrayed sister, she wasn't the one sitting in that garden anymore. She had fought like hell to get here, yes, but she'd also let herself become something new. Not just healed, but transformed. Callan stumbled and fell, then looked up, surprised by the grass on his hands. Graham stood and walked over, lifting him gently, brushing off his palms. No fuss. Just love. That was what we'd created. A home where no one had to earn affection. Where love wasn't conditional or transactional. Where I could rest, fully, without fear of being replaced or betrayed. I used to believe love was sacrifice, compromise at any cost. Now I knew better. Love was clarity. Love was choosing each other again and again, even when it was hard. Especially then. In Graham's family, I found something else too, a sense of belonging I hadn't realized I was still aching for. His mother called me every Sunday, not out of obligation, but because she wanted to. His sister sent me recipes and baby clothes. When we visited for holidays, there was warmth, laughter, an ease that felt foreign at first, but soon became familiar. They never saw me as damaged goods or someone Graham had rescued. They saw me as Nora. Just Nora. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. More than enough. It arrived on a Wednesday, tucked in with the rest of the mail, bills, a coupon flyer, a catalog I hadn't subscribed to. The envelope was thick, the kind used for wedding invitations. Pale blush with gold lettering, as if elegance could somehow mask audacity. I felt the weight of it before I even opened it, some part of me already knowing. I stood at the kitchen counter, Callan's toy train looping endlessly across the floor behind me, and stared down at my name written in curling script. Mrs. Nora Rivers. I almost laughed at the irony. A title earned with love, now being addressed by people who had destroyed it the first time around. I opened it slowly, like peeling back a wound. The insert was heavy cardstock, embossed letters dancing across its surface in soft rose gold. You are cordially invited to the wedding of Leah Bennett and Ethan Hayes. My breath left my body. Not like a gasp, not sharp and sudden, but long and hollow. I let the card fall to the counter and gripped the edge, grounding myself. Leah and Ethan. My sister and my ex-husband. Inviting me to celebrate the union that had come from a betrayal so raw I'd once thought it would devour me. A smaller card slipped free. I picked it up, scanning the polite cruelty printed neatly across it. We would be honored if you stood beside the bride as her matron of honor, a symbol of family healing and forgiveness. Forgiveness. My hands trembled. Not with grief. Not even with rage. It was something more complicated, a deep, bone-deep disbelief at their gall. It wasn't enough that they had torn my life apart. Now they wanted to wrap it in pastel bows and turn it into a photo op. I hadn't spoken to either of them in years. After I left, they moved on quickly. Publicly. There were engagement pictures with matching flannel shirts, fall foliage behind them, Leah's caption reading something nauseating like meant to be. They built a narrative where they were the star-crossed lovers who'd simply followed their hearts, and I was what? The supporting character who'd gracefully stepped aside? I grabbed my phone and opened their contact names, both long ago blocked. I didn't unblock them. I didn't reply. I didn't call my parents. I knew exactly what they'd say. It's been so long, Nora. Maybe this is a chance to mend things. Family is family. But I knew better now. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to tell them what a mockery this was. Instead, I walked over to the trash can, lifted the lid, and dropped the entire envelope inside. Then I picked up my phone and blocked the return address from any future mailings. It was ridiculous, maybe, but symbolic in a way that mattered. The next morning, I woke up to find Graham already feeding Callan breakfast. He looked up at me, saw the tension still wrapped around my shoulders like a second skin, and didn't ask right away. He never pressed. But he saw me. He always saw me. It came, I said simply, sitting down at the table. He didn't need clarification. He only nodded once. You okay? I'm processing. He poured me a cup of coffee, set it beside my hand, and reached across the table. Whatever you decide to do, I'm with you. If you want to confront them, or ignore them, or scream into a canyon, I'm there. I smiled faintly. I already chose. I threw it out. A beat passed. Then he chuckled, that soft, low sound that always warmed my chest. Good. I leaned back, watching Callan smush banana into his high-chair tray, completely unaware of the ghosts lingering at our doorstep. And I realized something then. I wasn't angry in the way I used to be. I wasn't shattered. I wasn't seeking justice or apology. I was done. They wanted to stage a performance of redemption. To dress our history in flowers and silk and pretend that time and silence had transformed betrayal into beauty. But I wasn't going to play a part in their act. I had already written my ending, and it didn't include them. Later that week, Raina called. I told her about the invitation. She let out a long, horrified breath. They didn't. Oh, they did. And they asked you to stand beside her? Like some forgiveness mascot? That's exactly it, I said, voice dry. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm proud of you for throwing it away. I smiled, letting her words settle. So am I. That night, after Callan was asleep and the house was dim with the soft glow of lamplight, I sat at my desk and opened my journal. I hadn't written in a while. Life had been full, good full. But tonight, I wanted to mark the moment. I wrote, they invited me to bear witness to the love born from my pain. But I declined. Not because I'm bitter. Because I'm free. Let them believe whatever they need to believe. I have nothing left to prove. Then I closed the journal, turned off the light, and crawled into bed beside my husband. Graham pulled me close, no questions asked. And I slept. Deeply. Peacefully. Because I was no longer a chapter in their story. I was writing my own. It was Raina who called first. I let it go to voicemail twice. The third time, I picked up, more out of curiosity than concern. She never repeated herself unless it mattered. Hey, I said, balancing the phone between my ear and shoulder while rinsing dishes. Callan was on the living room floor stacking blocks, narrating his process in a steady, content stream. The afternoon sun poured through the windows, warm and ordinary. Raina's voice was off. Soft, almost too careful. Nora, I need to tell you something before you hear it from someone else. The words stopped me cold. My fingers paused beneath the running water. I turned off the faucet, wiping my hands on a towel. What is it? It's Leah, she said. She's sick. Kidney failure. It's serious. I didn't respond. I felt something shift in my chest, but it wasn't what I expected. No panic. No pain. Just a strange, still coldness. She's in stage 4, Raina continued. She's on a transplant list, but it's a long wait and you're a match. I closed my eyes. They tested me? They found an old record. From when you were listed as her emergency contact. I guess the database flagged it. They contacted your parents. And now, well, everyone's hoping you'll consider being a donor. Everyone. The word landed heavy. She wants to talk to you, Raina added, hesitating. She asked me to tell you. She said she's sorry. I stared out the window. Callan giggled from the floor. I couldn't even remember the last time I'd heard Leah laugh. I couldn't remember when her voice had become a shadow instead of a presence. I gave Raina a tired exhale. I'm not making promises. But I'll go. I'll see her. Stonefield Medical Center was hours away. I didn't rush. I didn't feel urgency, not the kind they probably expected. I packed a small bag, told Graham everything, and he didn't blink. Just nodded and said, I'll hold things down here. Take what you need. Driving through those familiar roads brought a strange ache I hadn't felt in years. The town hadn't changed much. Same storefronts. Same potholes. But I wasn't the same. And that was the difference. When I arrived at the hospital, my mother was already there, sitting in the hallway with a tissue clutched in her hand like it anchored her to the world. She stood when she saw me, her face flushed, mascara smudged beneath her eyes. Nora, she breathed, reaching for me like we hadn't gone years without real conversation. I stepped back before her arms could find me. I'm not here for a reunion. Her lips trembled, but she nodded. Of course. Of course. She led me down the corridor without another word. My father sat just outside Leah's room, a ghost of his former self, stooped shoulders, tired eyes. I didn't stop. I stepped past them all and pushed open the door. Leah looked smaller than I remembered. Pale, tired, but still Leah. Still the girl who'd once known all my secrets and had turned one into a weapon. Her eyes widened when she saw me. Nora, her voice cracked, thin and unfamiliar. I sat in the chair beside her bed, not leaning in, not reaching out. Just present. You came, she said, and the tiniest smile curved her lips like it might shatter. I'm not here to comfort you, I said. I'm here to look you in the eye. She blinked. I deserve that. Yes, I said, you do. There was silence then, the kind that held weight. I watched her twist the edge of her blanket in her fingers. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know sorry doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know I think about what I did every day. I tilted my head. Do you? Yes, she insisted, voice trembling. It was never supposed to happen like that. I wasn't trying to ruin your life. You didn't ruin it, I cut in. You freed me. She blinked at that. You tore something down. And I rebuilt something better. Stronger. Without you. Without Ethan. Without needing to ask myself if I mattered. Her eyes welled, but I didn't flinch. They say you're a match, she said. And I know I have no right to ask, but I'm asking anyway. I looked at her, really looked. The girl I used to call my sister was fading, both physically and metaphorically. She was shrinking under the weight of consequences long overdue. And maybe there was some part of her that meant this apology. Maybe not. It didn't matter. I came, I said, to see for myself, to hear it. And now I have. I stood, her hand lifted, reaching weakly toward me. Please. I'm not your cure, I said gently. You don't get to break someone and ask them to save you. She broke then, her face crumpling. My parents stood outside the door, watching with some cocktail of hope and dread. I walked past them, past the years of expectation, past the guilt they'd tried to fold around me like a blanket. I stepped into the elevator, heart steady. I had gone to see the truth. And I had seen it. But I was not going to bleed for people who had left me hollow. Not again. I didn't sleep that night. The hotel room was clean and quiet, tucked on the edge of town with a view of a parking lot and a dying tree, but it may as well have been a battlefield. I lay on my side, watching the pale moonlight slip through the curtains, and felt the heaviness of my own decision solidify inside me. Not out of spite. Not out of vengeance. But because, for once, I wasn't letting someone else's desperation dictate my life. In the morning, I returned to the hospital. Not because I owed them another moment, but because I wanted to be the one who said the words. No whispers. No messages delivered through someone else. I wanted them to hear it from me. Calm. Clear. Final. I walked the sterile hallway again, more certain this time. Nurses passed me without a second glance. Outside Leah's room, my parents stood waiting. My mother looked like she hadn't slept either, her eyes red-rimmed, her lips pressed tightly together. My father straightened when he saw me, hope flickering in his expression. You're back, he said softly, as if speaking too loud might scare me off. I am, I replied. She's worse today, my mother added. They say time's getting short. Please, Nora. Just talk to the doctors. Listen to the options. I've already spoken to them, I said. Extensively. They blinked. I made sure the information I had was accurate. I asked the right questions. I did what you all assumed I wouldn't. My mother reached for my hand, but I stepped back. Not out of malice. Out of necessity. I know she's dying, I said. And I came here to look her in the eye and decide whether I could live with saving her. And, my father asked, his voice low. I can't, I said. And I won't. They stared at me like I'd confessed to something cruel, something monstrous. But I didn't flinch. I'd done that too often in my life, softened my voice, swallowed my hurt, made myself small to keep others comfortable. My mother's face crumpled. You're really going to let your sister die? I met her gaze. She let a part of me die years ago. The difference is, I've rebuilt mine. She shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. This isn't who you are. No, I said. This is exactly who I am now. Someone who refuses to keep bleeding for people who never once protected her. My father tried again, his tone more measured. You were always the stronger one, Nora. You could forgive. I let out a breath, almost a laugh. You mean I was always the one who endured? That's not strength. That's survival. The door to Leah's room creaked open. She was sitting upright, her face pale but expectant. She'd heard the voices. Of course she had. I stepped past them and entered, this time without hesitation. Nora, she said, her voice thinner than before. You came back. I did. She tried to smile, her eyes searching my face for softness. Thank you. I didn't come back to change my mind, I said gently. She flinched. You didn't? No. Silence pooled between us. I wanted to, I admitted. I wanted to feel something that would justify giving a piece of myself to you. But I don't. And I'm not going to pretend I do. I'm your sister, she said, voice breaking. You were, I said. You were my sister, and you knew what Ethan meant to me. You knew how deeply I loved him, how much trust one placed in both of you. And you chose to tear that apart. That wasn't a momentary lapse or a mistake. That was a decision. You made it over and over again. I've paid for it every day since, she said. And now I'm dying. Doesn't that count for something? It counts, I said. It counts as the consequence of choices. And I've made mine. Her eyes welled with tears. I thought maybe if I could just talk to you, really talk. You don't need to explain anymore, I said. I'm not here for answers. I'm here to draw the line. And this is it. She swallowed hard, a tear sliding down her cheek. You hate me. I don't, I said honestly. I just don't belong to you anymore. I stood slowly, giving her one last glance. I hope you find peace in whatever time you have left. But I will not give more of myself to people who threw me away. Outside the room, my parents waited. They looked at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was. Maybe I was finally becoming the woman I should have been all along. I'm done, I said. And I walked past them, not running this time, not broken. Just done. Back in the car, I sat in silence for a long while before turning the engine. Then I reached for my phone, scrolled to Graham's name, and pressed call. He answered on the first ring. Hey, love, he said, his voice a bomb. I'm coming home, I whispered. Everything okay? No, but I am. He didn't ask for details. He just said, good. We're waiting. As I drove away from the hospital, the sky opened wide above me, and for the first time in a long time, the horizon didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a beginning. The kind built on boundaries, truth, and finally, peace. The news came quietly, like a pebble dropped into a still pond, ripples expanding outward, touching everything and yet disturbing nothing in me. Leah Bennett passed away on a warm October afternoon, less than a year after I'd walked out of that hospital room and drawn my line in the sand. I didn't hear it from my parents. I didn't hear it from anyone in my family. It was Raina who called, her voice hushed and careful. She's gone, she said simply. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Okay. There was a long pause, and then, with some surprise in her voice, she asked, Are you all right? I looked out at the lake from my kitchen window, where the water shimmered in the golden light of early evening. Callan's laughter floated in from the backyard, where he and Graham were kicking a ball beneath the tall trees, his little legs wobbling as he chased it with unfiltered joy. My daughter, Iris, slept against my chest, her breath warm against my skin, her tiny fingers curled into the fabric of my shirt like I was her whole world. I said. I'm all right. And I was. Not relieved. Not vengeful. Just still. Like some part of the storm had finally passed, leaving quiet in its wake. I didn't cry. I didn't feel guilt or triumph or sadness in the way I might have years ago. I simply felt the firm foundation of the life I had built standing strong beneath my feet. Leah was gone. But she had been gone to me long before she drew her final breath. The day she stood in my bedroom in Ethan's shirt, the day she made the choice to sacrifice our bond for her own gratification, That was the day I began mourning her. The funeral happened without me. I didn't attend. I wasn't invited, and even if I had been, I wouldn't have gone. That chapter was closed. Graham didn't bring it up again. He knew. He always knew when silence was the answer. That night, after we tucked Callan into bed and dimmed the lights in Iris's nursery, we sat on the porch together, the night cool but not cold, stars scattered across the sky like freckles. He held my hand, thumb brushing slow circles against my skin. "You feel different," he said quietly. "I do," I whispered. "I feel free." There had been a time when I thought I would carry the weight of that betrayal forever. That even in moments of joy, a shadow would linger, reminding me of the family that chose to look away, the sister who chose my husband, the husband who never once looked back after I left. But healing doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's the way your heart stops bracing for pain, the way you stop checking over your shoulder, the way you stop rehearsing answers to questions that no longer come. In our home, life moved forward. Graham cooked breakfast every morning, eggs just the way I liked them, toast always a little too dark, just how he preferred it. Callan asked a million questions about the world, his curiosity boundless. Iris began to smile, a wide, gummy expression that melted every remaining shard in me. Our days were full of noise and toys and spilled juice and bedtime stories. But they were also honest. No secrets, no facades, no one pretending. My parents never reached out. Not after Leah died. Not a card, not a call, not a single word. I expected as much. I think in their eyes I sealed my fate the moment I walked away from Leah's hospital bed. They'd chosen their daughter, just not the one who needed them most. But I didn't ache for their approval anymore. I didn't wish for them to see me. I saw myself, finally. And that was enough. One evening, months after the funeral, Raina visited. She and Graham exchanged hugs like family, and she scooped Callan into her arms as if she'd never missed a day. We drank wine on the porch, and when Graham went inside to settle the kids, she turned to me with that familiar look, equal parts fierce and fond. "You really did it," she said. "Did what?" "Lived," she said. "You didn't just survive them. You made something beautiful." I smiled, the truth of it warming me from the inside. "I'm not angry anymore." "Good," she said. "You shouldn't be." "It's not forgiveness," I added. "It's just detachment." "Peace." Raina nodded. "That's all anyone really wants, isn't it? Peace." That night, after she left and the house was quiet, I sat in the nursery with Iris in my arms, her eyes fluttering as sleep claimed her. I pressed a kiss to her forehead and whispered the promise I hadn't known I needed to make. You'll grow up knowing love that never has conditions. Never comes at a cost. I walked to the window and looked out at the life I had created, quiet, full, and sacred. A home with no ghosts in the corners. A family stitched together not by obligation, but by choice, by love, by truth. No lies, no shadows, no debts. And in that moment, with the moon rising high and still over Fair Lake, I knew I had finally arrived at the place I'd been walking toward for so long. Peace. Not handed to me. Not asked for. But earned. And this time, no one could take it from me. It's funny how people assume the past always lingers in your bones, like grief, betrayal, and heartache are permanent stains, refusing to fade no matter how much sunlight you let in. But the truth is, healing doesn't always come in loud declarations or grand gestures. Sometimes, it arrives so quietly, you don't even notice it until someone asks you a question, and you realize the answer doesn't hurt anymore. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon. I was helping Callan with his homework at the kitchen table, while Iris napped upstairs. Graham was prepping dinner, humming something off-key as he chopped herbs, the scent of rosemary and garlic filling the room. The windows were open. The breeze smelled like lake water and blooming jasmine. And for a moment, everything felt weightless, complete. That's when the question came. Callan, without looking up from his math worksheet, asked, "Mom, do you ever miss your old family?" I didn't flinch. Didn't freeze. I just looked at him, his earnest little face, brows drawn together like he was trying to understand a riddle no one had taught him how to solve. I put my pen down and reached for his hand. "No," I said gently. "I don't." He blinked, surprised by the simplicity of it. "Not even a little?" I shook my head. "Not even a little." He nodded, seeming to accept that answer, even if he didn't fully understand it. To him, family meant warmth and bedtime stories, pancakes on Saturdays and dance parties in the living room. He'd never known the coldness of silence used as punishment, or the twisting pain of realizing the people who were supposed to love you most could look right through you. And that was the point. I had broken the cycle. Whatever weight had once lived in my chest was gone now. It didn't cling to me like it used to. I didn't carry Leah's memory like a wound. I didn't replay Ethan's betrayal like a broken record. My parents' absence didn't echo anymore. It was just silence. And silence, I'd learned, could be holy. Later that night, after the kids were tucked in and the dishes had been washed, Graham and I sat on the back porch, legs tangled under a shared blanket. We watched fireflies blink across the yard, little bursts of magic in the dark. "I think he's starting to get curious," I said softly. "About where I came from. About who isn't here." Graham's gaze stayed on the horizon. "And how do you feel about that?" "Okay," I answered. "I don't feel like I'm hiding anything. I just finally understand the difference between secrecy and privacy." He turned toward me, brushing a piece of hair behind my ear. "You've come so far, Nora." "I know," I whispered. "And for the first time, I'm not looking over my shoulder. I'm not waiting for old pain to catch up." He kissed my temple. "That's because you've outpaced it." He was right. I had outpaced it. I'd built a life so rooted in truth, there was no room for the illusions that once tried to define me. My identity wasn't forged in the fire of betrayal anymore. It had been tempered by love, boundaries, and choosing peace every single day. Sometimes I thought about writing it all down. The full story. Not for revenge or even for closure, but for clarity. So that if Iris or Callan ever asked the deeper questions, I could hand them pages instead of pain. I wanted them to understand that their mother had once been broken but had never stayed that way. I wanted them to know that strength didn't always look like fighting back, it sometimes looked like walking away and never turning around. I'd made peace with the fact that I'd never have the tidy family narrative others did. I wouldn't be sending Christmas cards to relatives I hadn't heard from in a decade. There would be no surprise reunions, no healing montages. Just the quiet certainty that I had done the right thing, even when everyone around me had begged me not to. And that, I realized, was more than enough. One evening, as I tucked Iris into bed, she looked up at me with her wide, curious eyes and asked, "Mama, what does strong mean?" I paused for a moment, brushing a soft curl away from her cheek. "Strong means knowing who you are, even when other people try to tell you something different." She nodded, as if she understood, even though she was only 3. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "And you, my girl, are strong already." As I walked out of her room, I glanced back one last time. She was curled up with her stuffed bunny, already drifting into dreams. Safe, whole, loved, and so was I. There were no ghosts left in my life. Only echoes of lessons I had learned the hard way. I carried them like stones in my pocket, not heavy, not burdensome. Just reminders of where I'd been and how far I'd come. This was the truth I lived now. I didn't need to rewrite the past. I only needed to keep writing the future. With Callan's curiosity, Iris's laughter, Graham's unwavering presence, and the peace I had fought so hard to earn, I knew one thing for certain. My life wasn't defined by the people who broke me. It was defined by how I rose. And I had risen into something beautiful, something whole, something true.